La première partie s'est tenue cet
Council,
après-midi.
the first part of which was held this afternoon, and we will continue tomorrow morning as well. This meeting over the last few hours has enabled us to continue to coordinate as we have in the past against the COVID virus. Regarding the current situation, we agreed on the emergent nature of the fight against the variants and have decided to launch a commission fight against it called ERA, which will bring together industry players, regulators and experts using European financing so that we can be at the forefront of innovation and delivering healthcare solutions in Europe. We also discussed the new orders placed by the European Commission with Pfizer and Moderna, looked at ways to ramp up the deliveries and looked at potential future other vaccines, such as from Valneva and Novavax. The European approach is something that I defend, as you know, because this is the only way to organize an effective vaccination campaign in Europe, and it has been bearing fruit. We've been able to use various types of vaccines using a range of technologies so that each country can deploy its vaccination campaigns side by side since December. Letting everyone chaotically do as they wanted would have been useless, especially as we are now seeing the variants around Europe today. Our goal is to secure orders that have been placed, to continue to secure more doses in Europe, and we have seen more labs in Europe that have accepted to convert some of their production sites to produce vaccines that have already been developed and have been certified. And we've also worked on preparing for the future. On that note, we also discussed how we could strengthen European production of vaccines by identifying available industrial capacity who could help produce more vaccines and health solutions, and also looking forward to second-generation vaccines that will arrive in the autumn, and identifying our needs for inputs with clear mapping of those needs. I would like to thank the European Commission for the huge amount of work that has been done recently by President van der Leyen and the task force with this dedicated team. The European Union is setting itself up to be able to produce, as the European Commission has said, more autonomously based from this year and in greater quantity, because it seems that we will have to live with this virus going forward. This means that we will need to implement vaccination campaigns and we will need to strengthen European autonomy in that regard. We will also need transparent information on what European companies are producing and exporting. This is the goal of the export control mechanism that we have called for. I would also like to draw your attention to the importance of this kind of mechanism for all of the components, not only vaccines, but also diagnostic kits and other treatments. This means we need to be vigilant and careful, especially with our neighbours. As I've said, we may need to control some internal European borders, and this will serve to fight against the spread of some of the virus variants. However, the general principle must be to maintain freedom of movement for cross-border workers and transporters to make sure we don't break up cities and we don't break supply chains. It is possible to balance our lives with the virus and the need to fight against it. Coordination is also necessary in the way we certify vaccines. We can come back to this during the Q&A if you want, but these certifications are to be distinguished from what each country is doing. Once the vaccination campaigns in the European Union have been launched, they will serve to reorganize the flows between European countries. In that regard, I hope that we can return to normal life, and this tool is working towards that. But once again, we need balance. We don't want each country to develop its own system and to work, therefore, on a shared medical certification system. Our European people have not all been able to access the vaccine at the moment. Currently, it's based on age tranches, and there can be no special rights for people who have been vaccinated already. Therefore, there is not only health, but also legal and ethical concerns at play here, and we need to work on those in the coming months. Finally, and this is something that I discussed at length, Europe must step up in worldwide solidarity to fight against this pandemic. 1 year ago, we launched the Act A action to help Africa, and it is clear that we need to build this solidarity with our neighbours in the Balkans and especially in Africa. This type of solidarity requires health support, vaccines, treatment, diagnosis, primary health care support, and also developing all of the necessary equipment, but also economic support, as we have already started to supply and as we will continue to do. Regarding the vaccines, I defended France's position as expressed during the G7 summit last week. The European Parliament, the French Association for French-speaking languages, and other organizations have also said that we can only defeat this virus if we develop a worldwide vaccination campaign, especially with our African friends and neighbors. There are 6.5 million healthcare workers on the African continent. That means 13 million doses are required. 0.43% of those that have been ordered by the European Union, Japan, Canada, and the US. This is a minimal effort, but that can be organized over the coming weeks and months, and that is what we agreed on today, without that in any way upending our domestic vaccination campaigns. This kind of solidarity is important and will be necessary to remain credible in the COVAX process. Tomorrow morning, we will resume our agenda, speaking on a European defence union and also our southern neighbours. On defence, first of all, on the 5th of February, Chancellor Merkel and myself reaffirmed that we need to continue to identify threats and capacity together. This is what the new strategic roadmap program must serve to do. This is under the initiative of the German presidency of the Council and should wrap up with the French presidency in 2022. Since 2017, the European Defence Union has made great inroads with permanent councils, with some states, the Permanent Fund, the European Peace Facility, the Intervention Force. We have given structure to something that is very novel and will also involve industrial corporations and industrial and technological sovereignty. This is a new chapter that should lead the way to 2030 to adapt and adjust our operations to current and future threats such as space, sea, land, and cyber threats. And it is only by doing this that Europe will be able to play its full role in our shared security and be a reliable ally as part of NATO. Finally, we will discuss our cooperation with our southern partners in the shared space that is the Mediterranean Sea. We now are working on a shared agenda to commit 7 billion euros from now to 2027. This is a new program that will help support the young people in these countries, support investment in green technologies, support dialogue with civil society, and other things. This is why it's important that the heads of state can discuss these ambitious goals with our friends south of the Mediterranean. You know how much I support this, and the Two-Coast Summit will be the opportunity to develop France and Europe's position in this, whilst also involving the civil society. These are the few words that I wanted to share with you halfway through this European Council, and now I can answer your questions. A first question from Virginie Malingue from the Le Monde newspaper.
Oui, bonsoir. Je voulais revenir sur le mécanisme de contrôle.
Good evening. I'd like to discuss the export control mechanism that you mentioned. Has it fulfilled its objectives, which at the time was to identify whether AstraZeneca had exported doses outside of the European Union, doses that should have ended up in the EU? Have you confirmed suspicions from the time? And secondly, Have you decided or maybe discussed transforming it? Maybe being tighter with companies that don't adhere to it or other things? Now, this mechanism was discussed widely in the press when it was suggested by President van der Leyen. All I want it to do is to make sure that contracts are fulfilled. Agreements were signed to deliver doses to Europeans, and it's important that these doses are delivered on time and in the agreed volumes. And we're working on the vaccines that have already been approved. In Sanofi, a production site has been transformed to produce the Pfizer vaccine, and a site is being transformed in France to produce the Johnson & Johnson vaccine once that has been certified. This is a mechanism that enables us to make sure that the contracts are fulfilled, that we control the companies and make sure that the doses for Europeans get to the Europeans. The issue arises when some contracts are being fulfilled elsewhere but not with us, and that's when the real problem arises. And it is legitimate to implement this, especially when you look at what the Americans and what the Chinese are doing. However, should we ban exports? No, clearly that's not what this mechanism is for. For European production sites, we are producing vaccines that are exported outside of Europe. But I would like to remind you that we are also importing vaccine doses that are produced elsewhere, outside of the European Union. Many of the AstraZeneca doses that we have used came from the UK. We imported doses that were produced in the US. And in many cases, this trend is going to continue. We imported Moderna doses from outside of the EU, and we're currently finalizing the agreements that will enable us to implement what's known as fill and finish for Moderna. We must make sure that world production does not become fragmented. That's the first thing. So I am not in favor of everyone implementing their own vision of medical nationalism. But I am for cooperation and transparency, and this mechanism gives us that transparency for our citizens, for the labs as well, and enables us to control them to some degree. All of the labs that have committed to contracts and deliveries, we need to make sure that they fulfill those deliveries, because it's a contract, and contracts are important in and of themselves, but also because in a public health crisis, they committed to protecting the health of our European citizens. This is the state of the mechanism today. We decided today to continue this. There is no consensus today to strengthen this mechanism at this point because it may be counterproductive. That would be the risk. I also requested that we look at similar mechanisms for other things such as treatments and diagnosis kits. It's important that we have cooperation with the US in this regard, because what we want to avoid is any given power or continent limits exports, because I think that would be serious and counterproductive, and we wouldn't have any counterweight to that. Therefore, we are equipping ourselves, we're organizing, we're making sure our systems are sustainable, but this isn't a system that aims to block exports. It's simply to bring transparency and truth.
Oui, Virginie? Alors vous êtes sur mute. On vous entend plus, Virginie.
You are muted, Virginie.
Là, vous m'entendez?
Oui, très bien.
We can hear you now.
Désolée. Vous n'avez pas vraiment répondu à ma question.
I'm sorry, you didn't quite answer my question. Probably, maybe intentionally, which was, did the mechanism allow you to identify whether AstraZeneca had fulfilled its commitments? Has AstraZeneca sent doses outside of Europe that should have gone to Europeans? I answered you in a very general way, but we can put the spotlight on AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca sent European-produced doses outside of the EU, just as Pfizer and BioNTech do as well. Just as we've also received doses that weren't produced in the EU, such as by AstraZeneca, and we use them in the European market. Were these doses for the European market? The issue for the labs is to address the production bottleneck. What we've said to AstraZeneca at this point is that they have not fulfilled their latest delivery commitment. So we're talking with them, headed by the task force in the European Commission, saying that things are not up to spec, which then, of course, leads to a debate about the doses that were sent elsewhere and also doses that cannot be sent to other countries anymore. And we told them that they did not fulfill their commitments to Europe. So let's sure we separate the two things here. It makes sense that some European doses get sent elsewhere and some foreign doses get sent to Europe. It's true for AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and will be true for others, because that's simply how it works. That's the structure of pharma production today. But in the case of AstraZeneca specifically, there are delays in delivery, so we're putting the pressure on them to make sure that we get the doses and that the timeline is properly complied with. Jérôme Rivel from AFP.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir, vous m'entendez?
Good evening, can you hear me?
Oui.
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Alors, je voulais revenir sur le certificat vaccinal.
I wanted to come back to the vaccine certification process. Were you able to agree on any kind of implementation before the summer holiday? And nationwide, where is the process at? And what do you mean when you say that we can't have specific rights for people who have been vaccinated? Okay, let me distinguish between two mechanisms here, because I know that things are easy to get confused. First of all, there's the thought process that we all should be thinking about relative to a health pass. And this is something I will be discussing with the members of the government. We need to prepare for, to organize for, opening back up when that becomes possible. It's not possible today, but museums, concert halls, restaurants, meeting places, festivals, all of these things need to open up again. And of course, to organize reopening the country, we need to prepare to protect citizens and professionals. I would call this the health pass. Basically, people need to log in for an alert system. So let's say someone went to a public event, they would have a code, something very digital, that would provide automatic alerts and also enable us to contact trace them if they're a positive case. And this is something that we've done with the Santé COVID system in France. We could imagine integrating negative testing to this. Very often, people need to show that they have a negative test dating back 48 hours, and that could be